We're at my piano right now. This is a 9-foot Baldwin that came from Mills College, from the studio shared by Pauline Oliveris and Alvin Curran when they were in residency there. So it's a very special piano, and it's right now out of tune and needs a lot of work, but we'll do what we can today. We're all hunkering down at home and learning a lot about our coping strategies and our relationship to our work. And right now for me, practicing the piano is incredibly therapeutic, especially with a new work to learn every day. So today I want to talk about Frederic Rzewski, one of our great American composers, born April 13th, 1938, probably best known for his epic set of piano variations, The People United Will Never Be Defeated, and his North American ballads, and ensemble pieces like Coming Together. But I would really encourage pianists to explore some of his unplayed or rarely played compositions that are available at IMSLP, and there's a lot there to be discovered that is really worthwhile and interesting and just not performed. So those are great treasures there. I've commissioned, this is the third piece I've commissioned from Frederic Rzewski. This is Humanitas, a new work in 6 movements for Terry Riley on his 85th birthday, their friends and colleagues. And right away on this cover page, you see a note on the Latin text. There are Latin texts in this piece. These are not to be declaimed or pronounced correctly. On the contrary, they should be heard simply as sounds, almost as if the pianist did not understand their meaning. Right away, that's a challenge, because how do you not declaim? How do you not pronounce correctly? How do you say a Latin text simply as sounds? So this is one of the great joys of working with a living composer, that I can call Frederic Rzewski and say, give me an example of how you speak a text as if you don't understand its meaning, because that to me is a little bit of a challenge. So this is something that, you know, it's just one of those things you work with the composer on, which is a wonderful thing. I would like to just look at one page of the score. This is page 12, which is the beginning of the third movement of Humanitas, this new piece. And I just want to demonstrate how one page can take so much work. So I've written in some of the you can see that I've written in some of the beats, because I have a little bit of trouble counting here. But at the beginning, at the very opening, Frederic Rzewski subverts the regular meter, as he often does, because you look at the first measure and you think it might be something like that. But instead, he goes, if you look very closely, and manuscripts are always a little more challenging to read, of course, and reading his handwriting. So it's this. So one thing about Frederic Rzewski and his articulations and how he writes a score is that you think about how he himself was a legendary pianist for the European Avant-garde, and he famously premiered Stockhausen's Klavierstück 10 in 1962. And so he worked with these composers who filled the page with markings, with dynamic markings, with articulations, with all sorts of markings that you have to pay attention to. And for them, it was exerting incredible control. And I think for him, it's sort of, this is all the things you need to pay attention to. So right at the beginning, there's a pedal marking just halfway through the first measure. And then pedal off. And then accents. Another thing about Frederic Rzewski premiering Stockhausen's Klavierstück 10 is that you think about that piece, which is all about activity and repose, and the contrast, the incredible contrast between motion and stillness. And that happens a lot in Frederic Rzewski's work, so that what's challenging is to have, you have the, and then you also think, you want to say, Frederic Rzewski, are you inspired by John Williams and the theme from Jaws? But I don't think he is. But he has this, and then silence, and then forte. So all of these little markings are so important, and it takes a lot of work to figure out how to do these kind of flashing changes of mood, very mercurial. And like some of his pieces, his nanosonatas, something he's been doing recently a lot is these sort of almost like recollections of memories, that there's something like that, and just a little tiny fragment, and then forte. So I'm playing it much slower than it should go, just to sort of work through these details. But it reminds me a little bit of someone like Ruth Crawford in her Preludes, who distills everything in just a short amount of time, and in just a few measures there are so many extremes of moods. And that's what's going on in a lot of Frederic Rzewski's music, that even in the space of a couple notes, here are accents right here. And so, for instance, he will say, don't just do staccato. That's staccato with an accent marking over it. So it's not a staccato. It's not just like that. You have to work on what is a staccato with an accent marking. And then there's this chord, which is just piano, right? So something like that takes a lot of work, and that's what I've been working on every day, is trying to achieve those sorts of sounds. And it's really challenging. And so also in the manuscript there are cases like this where he has a group of 10 notes, right? And if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, so it looks like there are 9 notes. So you think, oh, well, what's going on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But then the good thing about an iPad is then you can sort of enlarge, and you see right there a teeny weeny E flat there. I think that's a small E flat, right? So I think it's 10 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like that, which goes by very fast. But those are the kinds of things that I write down, all these questions like this, and I have this whole list of questions to ask him about the score. But what I've learned with Frederic Rzewski, like many people, if you collect all the questions and save them and then send a dozen questions all at once, then he doesn't answer, because it's just overwhelming, I think, for anyone to get a dozen questions all at once, to go through and answer. But if you write a note and say, Frederic Rzewski, I hope everything is going well, and I'm having such a great time working on the piece, and is that a little tiny E flat in the midst of that group of 10, then he'll answer, and he'll say, yes, it is. So I have all kinds of questions like that, especially in the score. let's look here at this measure. So here's a measure that goes, and is that note a B or an A, right? Does it go? But I think in terms of being consistent, it must be a B. So one has to be sure to do a staccato there and then a phrase. Because he has the same sort of interval there. But those are the kinds of questions I build up, and then I want to make sure to ask him. And it's full of challenges. Also, in terms of handwriting, on the next page, let me stop this for a sec. The next page. So there are moments like this where he's written a ledger line. The ledger line is like this, usually you count up with the ledger lines, but in this case, that bottom ledger line is at the very top of the staff. So I think you count up, and I think that is a G. Oh, that's very out of tune. But so things like that, are challenging because you look at that and you think, oh, if you count up, that's an E. That might look automatically like an E, but there's a ledger line which is right against the very top of the staff. So things like that are sort of challenging. But the main thing in this piece is getting all the information that's on the page and getting all the rhythmic stuff. And here's a bar, for instance. You think it might go, but if you really, really count, it's something like that. There's just a lot going on. So I will try to play it through. I'll try to play it through now. Also, I was talking before about how the piece is sometimes in little fragments of things, of like memories. And he often will embed a little bit of a folk song or protest song, anti-war song, which may or may not be familiar. And he actually got this from Pete Seeger, who in the 60s said to Frederic Rzewski, apparently, he talked about Bach and his chorales and how Bach would take a tune that would be familiar to the parishioners, to the people in the church, and he could invert it, he could have just a little fragment of it, he could have it backwards, and people would recognize this tune. And so Frederic Rzewski does something very similar, where he has a tune like he loves the old Celtic tune, Shul Arun, which again may or may not be familiar. But he has just a little bit of that. He has those throughout. On the next page, so there are these fleeting moments of sort of memories of these fragments of tunes. Here's what page 12 sounds like, and again I'm going to play it sort of under tempo, and I'm still trying to get everything that's going on, all the staccato markings and all the hairpin crescendos, but we'll see. So there's so much to work on. For instance, he writes these clusters like this. And I'm used to playing Henry Cowell clusters where it's either all on the black notes or all on the white notes. So this is something else to ask him, because there's an A at the bottom, C sharp at the top. So is this on the black notes or the white notes? And again, staccato with an accent and fortissimo. So all those little details are what makes the piece, what makes the real dramatic tension of the piece, and what really, really makes it work. So you have to pay attention to all of those little details. And as I was playing just now, I noticed, for instance, that this measure here, it's not, I mean, one wants to play it like that, but in fact it's slur and then, so it's supposed to be, but then going to mezzo piano and then pianissimo. So things like that, it's all challenging, and it's just really amazing to spend every day working out all these details and getting ready to play Humanitas by Frederic Rzewski. Thank you for joining me for page 12. I hope to bring the whole thing to you sometime soon.